Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It's Friday, April 17th, 2026. It's 9 a.m. And we are here to look at a bill, S-239, which came to us from the Human Services Committee yesterday. And we have with us Michelle Childs from Ledge Council to walk us through the bill. And Nolan's here for fiscal implications. And we may have somebody from the committee to come and talk to us as well. So Michelle.
Thank you. So good morning. For the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel. And I'll just do a quick little overview of what the bill is doing, and the amendment that came out of Human Services is it is creating a working group to specifically look at the laws and policies around the mandatory reporting of suspected child abuse or neglect. You might recall a couple of years ago, the General Assembly took on really kind of digging into the process once a report has been taken in and accepted for an assessment or an investigation, and then looking at the system all the way through substantiation and appeals and things like that. So that was a couple of years ago. So there was a pretty good kind of comprehensive look at that, and you passed some legislation with respect to that. But part of that, all that study and that legislation didn't address what happens before DCF accepts it for an investigation. And I think most of you know, we do have state laws around mandatory reporting of suspected child abuse or neglect. And there are a number of professionals who are required to make any reports. And if someone from Human Services come down, they can fill you in a little more, but they took a lot of testimony on this and had been hearing from folks that was an area that really needed to be looked at again. And you can see in the Human Services Amendment, they did include a little bit of findings there. And I think it informs kind of the direction of what they're looking to do with the working group. And you'll see there's some data there in subdivision A1 around that from 2022 through 2024, Vermont had a rate of referrals to child welfare services that was over 3 times higher than the national rate. However, only 17% of such referrals met the criteria for further action, and that was, substantially lower. And so I think the concern there is, are we employing best practices with regard to the laws and the policies? Is there proper guidance given to mandatory reporters? Is there proper training given to mandatory reporters? And so that is the first issue. And then the second issue is if you look at the finding in subdivision A3, and this is again pulling from that study and looking at the data around post-response services. So such as mental health care or substance misuse treatment or childcare or parent education. And again, Vermont was a little bit of an outlier there. So they found that only 20% of victims in Vermont, compared with a national average of 57%, were provided services for. And so those are two things that they're going to have the working group take a look at. So if you look at subsection B is just the creation of the working group and laying out the charge for the working group. Subsection C at the top of page 3 is who's going to be on that working group. And so there's a number of folks that were really trying to get it focused, but not have too many people on there. I'll just draw your attention to some folks who may be looking for the per diems and expenses. So you'll see 1 and 2. You have someone who has lived experience. One is lived experience as an abused or neglected child, and the other one is a member with lived experience. They were reported for suspected child abuse or neglect, but the report was found to be unsubstantiated. On the rest of them, I think generally they would be paid by their regular day job to be attending this, but I don't know entirely, like if you look at the top of page 4, subdivision 10, this is kind of directed at a certain person. It's a physician co-chair of the Vermont Citizens Advisory Board, and they are the state entity that looks at compliance with federal law, with CAPTA. So I don't, I'm not quite sure about that one, but the two members with the lived experience would be the people who would obviously most likely be looking for per diems and expenses. In subsection D, these are just folks that the working group is to consult with. So as you know, they can talk to whoever they want, but the committee wanted to highlight these groups, and a lot of these groups approached the committee and asked to be included in that. And then you have an amendment that I'll go through with regard to that as well. Then if you look.
These are people that aren't in the working group itself, but they
Correct.
should be talking to these people.
Right. So human services was being very careful about, not having it too big for a number of reasons, from practicality to also expenses.
Right, well, and actually getting anything done.
Right. Then if you look at the top of page 5, subsection E is, there is essentially an interim presentation. They didn't want to require some big report or something like that, but they wanted the working group to kind of do a check-in with the committees of jurisdiction on or before April 1st of next year, and then do a final report by October 1st of 2027. And that would be kind of detailing any recommendations and the work that they did. And so it initially had a much shorter time period, but everybody was saying there's a lot of work to do and we should take a lot more time to do it. We'll do a check-in. And then just noting that there's that October 1st, 2027 is because that will be the interim between the first and the second year. And you have obviously much earlier drafting deadlines for that second year. So they have it in kind of early fall.
For getting a bill.
Yeah, I just, so who's the convener?
It is, if we're about to get to that. Yep.
Oh,
okay.
okay, all right.
I can jump to that if you want me to.
Why don't we just keep going?
Just keep it, sorry.
Sure. So F is just around things that they're supposed to prioritize. And I don't know, you can read that yourself. If you have any questions, let me know. But it's kind of the things that I talked about, and they're going to be looking specifically at a couple sections that are in current law. Everything from, who should be a mandatory reporter, the process for reporting, and also any exemptions. There is one exemption related to clergy. Clergy are mandatory reporters. That was added a number of years ago, but not too long ago because I was here. And but there are exclusions for certain communications with clergy that provide for exemptions. And so they're going to look at, does that make sense now? Should there other people have, because other people might have confidential or privileged communications like therapists, but they don't have exemptions about reporting. Then if you look at the back page.
Well, I was just looking at page 6 for a minute, and I like that number 2, that she'll avoid expanding its review into matters unrelated to banding.
Right.
People can wander off, and it's nice to sort of put a little guardrail.
And they'll have plenty to talk about.
Yes. Yes.
And then also, so subdivision 3 on page 6 is, they're supposed to be, coordinating with obviously federal law. And then 4 is to promote efficiency and avoid any duplicative work. They're supposed to be working with the Children's Justice Act Task Force and the Vermont Citizens Advisory Board, which I had mentioned kind of work with CAFTA compliance. And then 5 is that they're supposed to be looking at other states' best practices. So here we get to the good stuff, right? So subsection G, so it's going to be DCF is going to be providing all the support for this working group. So they would be convening it, doing the legal work, doing the technical work and administrative and organizing them. They're to convene on or before August 15th of this summer. And then moving on to the last page, page 7. If you look at subdivision G3, your standard language around members of the working group who are not otherwise compensated for their attendance are entitled to per diem and expenses. And you'll see on lines 5 and 6, these monies are to be paid from monies appropriated to DCF already. So they're going to assume those costs within their existing budget.
Mike?
Going back to G.
Mhm.
Did they take testimony from DCF that they have the capacity to take more work on?
They were in the room the whole time, so I don't know that I was there necessarily for them to say that specifically, but were partners in all of this, and they do have a member sitting on the committee. They did ask for.
What I mean is the logistical capacity, because the leadership is going to do so much, but then there's going to be a lot that's required by.
I don't want to speak for them.
So
I
my
presume,
question
I
was, did they
presume so.
testify?
I was not there for any testimony in opposition. I think that they're in support. But you would probably want to check with the sponsor, because I wasn't there for all the testimony.
I have asked, as Ms. Host, Rep. Cole, so we're checking to see if she can come down and explain something.
Yeah, thank you. On section 1 for the working group, and then continuing on to the working group consulting with stakeholders. I'm not sure I've ever heard of all of these groups, but they all seem to be doing some of the same thing. You know, we've got the Vermont Child Youth Family Advisory Council. We have the Vermont Parent Representation Center.
That's different.
That's what I'm asking. We have the Vermont Child Youth Family Advocate or Deputy Advocate. Is that the same as the other advisory council? We have Vermont Parent Child Center Network. We have the Vermont Citizens Advisory Board. That's the one that works with CAPTA.
Mhm.
Okay. Obviously, you have the DA agency that obviously works with a lot of this. Then you have on the stakeholders, we have Kid Safe Collaborative, Voices for Vermont's Children, the Vermont Representative Center. Is that the same one as on the first? Okay, that's the one of the same thing. Vermont's Child Safe Program. I mean, there's a lot of different advocacy groups that work with this. Are they duplicative? Are they state funded, or, is there some way you could make it smaller? You've got 13 in the.
So Lynn, Autumn's gone up to see if Rep. Cole can come down. I think this is probably not a ledge council question.
Curious. We got a lot of people.
Right, and I think
and they're all.
perhaps Tiff and Mike have more experience with these groups than
Yes.
certainly some of us and the rest of us in the room. So if either of you have anything you want to say about it, go for it, please.
Well, I agree, this is a big group, but the little I know about group dynamics is the group's it's gonna be harder to work the bigger the group is.
Where they won't be able
So
to.
there's 11 people, no, there's 13 people in the working group.
And then there's 10 advocates, stakeholders.
And 10 stakeholders that they have to consult with, who
Yeah.
don't have to come to all the meetings, they might zoom in for a meeting or something like that.
Hey,
Go ahead.
I don't have a problem with, I feel like Human Services has thought about this. And, these in section D, all of those organizations listed are just advisors. They're listed as potential advisors, consultants. And when I read through these names, I've worked with a number of these organizations and they work with families in different ways. And they see different things. They may many of them may have responsibilities as reporters. And in part, to get everybody on the same page, it would make sense. I really don't have a problem with the groups that are listed here, because they really kind of have a different perspective on the issue. And there are regularly working groups that have 15 people.
I know, and
It can be hard, but
more, and it can be, I think, distracting from the purpose of the group.
Where they can't all be there for the meetings when they really should be there.
Anyway,
The bigger it gets, the more complicated it gets.
yeah,
And and it does to me as an outsider. I think this is actually an important thing, but the more groups we have that are doing this, and of course, that doesn't even count all your regular mandatory reporters, all the medical people, all of the teachers, all of the other probably childcare center, all the other groups that are mandatory reporters are not in this. You know, the more people you got, the thumbs in the pie, you know, it's not surprising we have more reporting in the findings. You know, and then are they all gonna be there? I mean, are they I think sounds duplicative to me. That's.
So I've asked, we can't find
Put it
the,
up a little.
I've asked the vice chair or ranking member of Human Services to come down and see if she can come down. So we get started. Yeah, I have Mike and then Tom.
I can say a little bit, something about the number of reports. And I've experienced what we call ping ponging, where you have an apartment building. Somebody reports somebody, oh, you reported me, I'm gonna report you, and it starts ping ponging up. And really that can take up a lot of the numbers of, and it'll be interesting to see if they could discern how much of that is part of this.
Uh-huh. Tom?
How many meetings were proposed again?
12, more than 12.
more than 12.
And so that, again, I'll also say the size of the committee doesn't bother me. I think if it were a 6-week session, I think too many people, too many voices would make it not much of a report because there's not enough time for the voices to be heard. But I have no problem with this politically, because if we delete voices, then when a report comes back, that's going to be a piece where people are going to say, well, my voice wasn't heard. And we know when it comes to this kind of conversation that the voices really need to be heard. They need to be invited. They need to be taken seriously. And yes, it can create some time of he said, she said. It can create some time of feeling like there's not enough time. But 12 weeks is a serious commitment of time. And I think that would be helpful in kind of stretching out those voices. So I'm fine with the size of the committee. I think to delete people out of it would actually be more detrimental than including them in overall.
So Dave.
This is an area that I used to oversee when I was commissioner. And one of the adages was nothing about us without us.
Yes.
So I think casting the net, although it can be unwieldy, it's important.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll see if anybody comes down from Human Services, but we have to maybe on the content, because we're really here about the money. We can assume that they spent a lot of time working on this.
I can't share that they did.
Yes.
They certainly did. And the number of folks on the working group is smaller. And then, but Senate had passed it out quite quickly to kind of to make crossover. And so Human Services really took a lot of time and a lot of testimony from folks. And everybody knows, you know, the experience of everybody comes in and wants on, but they did try to be very discerning, and the chair spoke often about wanting to limit the number of people on the working group to make sure it doesn't become unwieldy and have some logistical problems with being able to do the task. And so it was a common topic of conversation.
I'm sure it was. So Rep. Garofano is on her way down, but in the meantime, we have two things we can take up. One is to, Nolan, do you want to mention the fiscal impact?
Big fiscal.
And then we'll go over an amendment that I told you guys I was proposing. You can just stay right there.
I'm gonna be real fast. Chair too. You can pull up another chair. For the record, Nolan Mangle, the Joint Fiscal Office. What I would say is, sorry, so there's no fiscal note on this. When it passed the Senate, the big important thing is on the last page where it says the per diems permitted under 32 BSA 1010. That's where suddenly it costs money.
Yeah.
And that's where it says, okay, if you are not getting, number 3, members of the working group who are not otherwise compensated for their attendance at meetings shall be entitled to per diem and compensation under 32 VSA 1010. That was not in the Senate passed version. So it didn't have a fiscal note, it didn't need a fiscal note because people on the committee were not entitled. I only actually found out this morning that this language was there and that there would be, now suddenly they're entitled to the thing, to the per diems. That said, it's, to Michelle's point, it's kind of hard to get a sense. It's either 2 people or 6 people, depending on how you interpret, people. That said, even if we're 6 people at 12 meetings, it's like $9,500. It's under 10,000. So, and to me, anything under 10,000, really, frankly, in a budget as big as theirs can sort of be captured. And that's assuming that all those people go to all 12 meetings. To
Right.
me, like $10,000 can be captured within their existing budget. You don't need an appropriation of $9,500.
Okay.
Especially when people may or may not go to all the meetings or meetings get canceled because of weather or whatever. So that's like the absolute worst case scenario is if you have as many as 6. If it's only 2 or 3, then you're looking at $3,000, which is really, nominal.
Right.
So
It's still pretty nominal here. So it can be
Exactly.
absorbed in their budget. So we don't have to appropriate anything. Right.
correct.
We like those, but we like these bills.
Yeah, so those are my.
Okay. Any questions for Nolan? Thank you, Nolan.
I'll come back with a better joke next time. I'm sorry, I was a little flat-footed this morning, so
You have time to practice.
I'll make up for it. There's always conflict.
Is it okay? I have to be in another committee.
Okay, so why don't you do the amendment and then we'll ask Father to just help us out with understanding the other part.
And I just want to say, JFO did look at this language, but it was, I guess that didn't come over to you, but
Okay.
there wasn't a fiscal note or anything. They just checked the language with regard to making sure about the money coming from.
So before I'll just give you a background. Yesterday, Representative John Kaczynski and I got an email from Agency of Education saying we want to be part of the working group. That was the part of everybody wants in. And I chatted with Chair Wood about that and while we were on the floor, and she said they can be part of the consult with stakeholder group. So they'll get to participate, but there are just more people that we didn't want to add. So they are on there. And then she also asked for a minor change instead of it being a school counselor, that it had to be somebody from the School Council Association. So that's essentially the amendment that you're going to see that Michelle was giving us. But that was the reason it came up. I didn't just dream it up myself. Well, I had nothing to do on the floor.
I saw the note.
Yes, yeah. So I had tried.
You can participate.
Yeah, okay, Michelle.
So I think you've covered it mostly. Everyone should have a copy of draft 1.2 from this morning. And it would just be striking, you know how you have to, when there's the and there's a list and you have to strike the ones above. So you already have in the report from Human Services, consult with the AGO and the Vermont School Counselors Association, and then it would be adding AOE. And that's just on the consult. They would not be members of the committee.
Right, and also changing a school counselor appointed by.
Right.
To follow the Vermont School Council Association, and then have to figure out who to do it. So now I know why the Attorney General is on there, because of that and the comma. So that's at the bottom of page 4, in case you're trying to figure out where this fits into the bill. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions for Michelle before we let her go? Thank you for your
5 minutes, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll have Representative Fano come up just briefly. We appreciate you coming down at the last second.
No worries.
So introduce yourself and.
Representative Ray Garofano, Essex Junction House Human Services Committee. I think I've been here this year.
Well, welcome.
Or in this,
Nice to
in
see you.
here, but yeah.
Yeah, nice to see you now. So there was just some questions about and you have the experience, lots of different organizations. Do they all need to be there? How did you sort of figure that out?
Yes, so when we got the bill, honestly, it was, we had to make a lot of changes to membership. And as we heard testimony, it was obvious that certain people needed to be on the work group.
Yeah.
And then we moved some people around, but we were being really thoughtful because we also don't like big working groups, large ones. And I just want to point out that most of the people on the work group are going to be there in their professional capacity. So they're not going to be expecting per diem. So it's just the two members with lived experience. And because we've done, in the last few years, we've done a lot of work on the other side of this process where once the report is made and it goes to the to DCF and they do an assessment or an investigation, we have done a lot to update that side of it. We thought that was really important that the right stakeholders be in this group to inform the other piece, especially because we're such outliers.
Yeah, it's kind of a.
And it does really impact people who go through this process. So
Great. I think that's all we needed to hear. Good.
we were actually very surprised that it had to come to appropriations because.
Anytime there's a per diem,
I know,
it's like, yeah, that's all. But we want to make sure things aren't duplicative and all
Yeah,
that.
and
Those are the kind of
The
questions.
department has also confirmed that they would absorb this within the
Yes.
budget, so there wouldn't be any additional appropriation.
So Lynn and Mike?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that my concern is half of these things I've never heard of, these organizations. I mean, I'm aware that there's child abuse and that the DAs and a variety of different groups and all the people who are mandatory reporters. But they all seem to have the same name or very similar names. And, you know, I assume they're all nonprofits or they're probably being funded by the government or, you know, maybe other things. But the point is that there's like 6 or 8 of them that to me sound like they're all doing the same work. And is there some way, you know, I mean, the more fingers in the pie or, you know, the more you sort of can create your own work and
Sure.
they're all reporting, you know, I'm just curious as to what they all do and why there's so many of these organizations. And
So the
there's a bunch of
organization.
them, at least 6 or 7 sound like they all have the same name.
Yeah, and I think that's just our nonprofit world in Vermont. A lot of things sound similar. So I wouldn't take that as that they're duplicating the work. We were very thoughtful about making sure that the people who are being impacted. So a lot of the people that, when we got the bill from the Senate, initially people that were actually making the reports or were mandated reporter weren't as represented as we need to. And we need to understand, the work group needs to understand what the process is and what education and training, what messaging they're getting, the mandated reporter is getting to be able to recommend changes. So unless you have the people who are actually the mandated reporters informing that process, you're not going to end up with, we didn't believe that we would get good enough recommendations.
So were all of these groups mandatory reporters? Because my understanding is the mandatory reporters are people out there in other professional situations, the medical community, the teachers, childcare providers, you know, people that work with
Which is
children.
what a lot of those organizations are. That there's a physician, there's a principal from schools, there's law enforcement, parent-child centers, DCF, the network who deals with kids being neglected and abused, Center for Crime Victim Services. So they're all,
Plus a bunch of others.
yeah, well, a lot, don't confuse the who you consult with the working group, because that's where it starts to look the more duplicative perhaps.
You know, just like I said, you know, we've got the Vermont Child, Youth and Family Advocate or Deputy. We have the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, the Director of Parent-Child Abuse Vermont, Vermont Parent-Child Center Network. You know, it goes on, and then all these other stakeholders all have, sounds like they're all doing sort of the same work, but that was just.
Okay. They're not. I can assure you that these organizations, the ones on the work group and the ones being consulted, they all represent a different perspective in this whole process. The process is really confusing. That's what we heard, and that's what we're trying to improve upon. So people who are mandated reporters are making good reports. I mean, it takes a lot of resources to go through all these reports, right, at the agency. And when we're such an outlier on the number of calls that are coming in that DCF has to process, we felt like something is wrong and we need to make sure the right people are on the work group so they can make I mean, I think the goal for everyone on the work group, the testimony that we heard is to reduce the number of calls that are coming in because they're not being substantiated. They're not calls that are coming in and actually mean abuse or neglect for a child. So we want to not be at the top of the scale when you look at it. Nationally, we want to make sure the calls that are coming in are good reports that are preventing and alerting DCF and the other authorities of actual abuse. And that ultimately reduces the resources that I think we will use in the state, because DCF has told us we're using a lot of resources to kind of go through all these and respond to these, the reports that are being made. So the process is just confusing, and we need the right people at the table to ensure they can simplify it and make it better.
Great. So I'm going to move to Mike and then we'll vote on things.
Sure. Just a quick idea that I have had since being on something like this, where the justice of the Supreme Court had a commission, and within the grant, they wrote a position in there for committee assistant. Because he said, I'm not going to ask somebody who's already got a full-time job to then take it on. It would be like saying, Ray, okay, you take this on, you send out the announcements, you take the minutes, you keep the records. Did you take testimony about whether the DCF has the capacity for somebody to take this on?
DCF testified and they were supportive of the bill as it passed. So we didn't specifically ask.
Yeah.
They felt that they would have told us if they didn't have the capacity or needed an actual position or a partial position, but they were in the room.
Yeah.
And very supportive of this work group. And they were, you know, the one thing we did was change the timeline. We didn't initially, it was only until the end of the year. And that felt like it wasn't enough time for the work group to be able to do because as we dug in, it's a complex process.
All right. Thank you, Ray, for coming down at the last minute. We really appreciate it. We're going to vote on the amendment and the bill is amended. So I'll accept a motion to approve draft 1.2 of our committee amendment. Sir John, Wayne, okay.
We're voting on the amendment.
We're voting on the amendment first.
Where's my horse?
And the bill is amended as amended. Any questions on our amendment?
He said combined to school.
If there are none, the clerk will call the roll, please. This is just on the amendment right now.
Representative Blumley,
Yes.
Representative Dickinson.
Yes.
Representative Feltus.
Yes.
Representative Kaczynski.
Yes.
Representative LaRoche.
Yes.
Representative Lewicki.
Yep.
Representative Nigro.
Yes.
Representative Squirrel, yes. Representative Stephen. Representative Jacoboni.
Yes.
Shy,
Yes.
11-0-0.
Okay. And then make a motion to pass S 239 as amended by House Human Services as amended.
All four as passed Senate and amended by House Human Service, further amended by.
Okay, whatever he says. All right, is there a motion to do that?
So
Dave, John, second. Okay, got the T down there this time. Any further discussion? Thanks, Ray. If not, clerk, please call the roll.
Representative Blumley.
Yes.
Representative Dickinson.
Yes.
Representative Feltus.
Yes.
Representative Kaczynski.
Yes.
Representative LaRoche.
Yes.
Representative Lewicki.
Yes.
Representative Nigro.
Yes.
Representative Squirrel, yes. Representative Stephen.
Yes.
Representative Jacoboni.
Yes.
Representative Shaw.
Yes.
7-0-0.
Thank you. Mike M., I think this is your area, right? Family Services.
I'm glad to do
You're
it.
glad to do it? Okay. You will hear from Trevor. So committee, that's all we've got. I don't know that we're getting any bills today. So I don't know if we'll actually be in committee on Tuesday. Although we may do a little check-in, I'm just not sure. So we don't have to be here until the 4 on Tuesday, as far as I'm concerned, no other big things. So